सुरक्षा हर पिच पर, ताकत लंबी पारी खेलने की, परफेक्ट फिट, क्वालिटी टेस्ट, मैच से पहले ये सारे चेक्स बहुत जरूरी होते हैं, ठीक वैसे जैसे घर की छत चूज करते समय। तो बस ले आइए GSW कलर ऑन प्लस की छत, जो दे आपके घर को मजबूती और सुरक्षा। GSW कलर ऑन प्लस, सुंदर छत सालों साल।
GSW न्यू स्टील TMT सरिया बेस्ट है।
सरिया दिखता कहाँ है?
ये देखिए बेस्ट क्वालिटी।
चेस्ट गार्ड है, दिखता कहाँ है?
दिखता नहीं तो कुछ भी लगाओगे क्या? ये देना।
JSW न्यू स्टील TMT बार, प्योर स्टील, मजबूत घर।
ये दीवारें जानती हैं हर शुरुआत का पता। एक नई सोच के साथ अपने सपने की सुबह।
जब उम्मीद मिलाए हिम्मत से हाथ, हर सपने को मिले मजबूती का साथ।
आओ बनाए हर सपने को मजबूत JSW सीमेंट के साथ। JSW सीमेंट, द लीडर्स चॉइस।
कभी हिंदुस्तान के रंगों के बारे में सोचा है? लाल, पीला, हरा, नीला। तो चलो मिलकर इस रंगीन चादर को फिर से सिलते हैं। जो तेरा वो मेरा, और जो मेरा वो सबका। इसीलिए पहली बार JSW पेंट्स लाए हैं 1808 शेड्स एक ही प्राइस पर। JSW पेंट्स, थिंक ब्यूटीफुल।
In 1868, the Tata Group was founded on a philosophy that put the community at the heart of its existence. Today, we are a $100 billion global enterprise. Our today has been built on enduring values. Our today is about delivering excellence across business sectors. Our today is about building a future-ready nation. Our today has a strong foundation with community at its core. Our today is dedicated to the communities we serve. Our today is always about more than just today. Our today is a continuous journey for a better tomorrow. Tata, leadership with trust.
सर, अपनों को खुश रखना इससे आसान हो ही नहीं सकता। साहब, अपनों को खुश रखना इससे आसान हो ही नहीं सकता। हुजूर, अपनों को खुश रखना इससे आसान हो ही नहीं सकता।
अपनों को खुश रखना इससे आसान।
अपनों को खुशियां दिलाना आसान नहीं बनाते तो आगे कैसे बढ़ते। इसीलिए हम जो भी करते हैं उसे बेहतर बनाते आ रहे हैं, बनाते रहेंगे। बजाज फिनसर्व, थिंक इट डन।
आने वाले कल की दस्तक हमें सुनाई देती है, नई मंजिल है जिस ओर हमें वो दिशा दिखाई देती है। नए इंडिया का नया जो नए इंडिया का नया जोश।
और नए इंडिया के इस सफर में टेक्नोलॉजी की शक्ति लेकर आपका भागीदार रहेगा रिलायंस। रिलायंस, नए इंडिया का नया जोश।
Welcome to the world of Tata Steel. A flagship global business conglomerate, the Tata Group. Tata Steel is one of the world's most geographically diversified steel producers, with operations and commercial presence across the world. The story began with the dream of one man, Jamsetji Nusserwanji Tata, a pioneer, a visionary, a man ahead of his times. He had his heart set on building a steel plant in India that would compare with the best globally. His dream was brought to fruition by his son, Dorabji Tata, and thus was born Tata Iron and Steel in Jamshedpur in 1907. At the turn of the 21st century, fueled by its global aspirations, Tata Steel expanded its footprint to Southeast Asia in Singapore and Thailand. Acquisition of Chorus in Europe in 2007 placed it amongst the top global steel companies in the world. In 2015, Tata Steel set up a state-of-the-art integrated steel plant at Kalinga, Nagar, Odisha in India. The Phase 2 expansion of Kalinga Nagar steel plant from 3 million TPA to 8 million TPA is currently underway. The company is all set to pursue domestic growth with its acquisition of Bhushan Steel Limited and the steel business of Usha Martin. This forms part of the overall strategy to increase its India footprint, build capacity in long products, and enrich the product portfolio. Besides steel manufacturing facilities, the company has mining assets in the state of Jharkhand and Odisha in India. Tata Steel has evolved into a leading steel manufacturer, catering to diverse market segments. In its trend-setting journey, spanning more than a century, Tata Steel has contributed immensely towards the well-being of the planet and people. Guided by its vision to be the global steel industry benchmark for value creation and corporate citizenship, Tata Steel is poised to lead.
सुरक्षा हर पिच पर, ताकत लंबी पारी खेलने की, परफेक्ट फिट, क्वालिटी टेस्ट। मैच से पहले ये सारे चेक्स बहुत जरूरी होते हैं, ठीक वैसे जैसे घर की छत चूज करते समय। तो बस ले आइए GSW कलर ऑन प्लस की छत, जो दे आपके घर को मजबूती और सुरक्षा। GSW कलर ऑन प्लस, सुंदर छत सालों साल।
JSW नियो स्टील TMT सरिया बेस्ट है।
सरिया दिखता कहाँ है?
ये देखिए बेस्ट क्वालिटी।
चेस्ट गार्ड है, दिखता कहाँ है?
दिखता नहीं तो कुछ भी लगाओगे क्या? ये देना।
JSW नियो स्टील TMT बार, प्योर स्टील, मजबूत घर।
ये दीवारें जानती हैं हर शुरुआत का पता। एक नई सोच के साथ अपने सपने की सुबह।
जब उम्मीद मिलाए हिम्मत से हाथ, हर सपने को मिले मजबूती का साथ।
आओ बनाए हर सपने को मजबूत JSW सीमेंट के साथ। JSW सीमेंट, द लीडर्स चॉइस।
कभी हिंदुस्तान के रंगों के बारे में सोचा है? लाल, पीला, हरा, नीला। तो चलो मिलकर इस रंगीन चादर को फिर से सिलते हैं। जो तेरा वो मेरा और जो मेरा वो सबका। इसीलिए पहली बार JSW पेंट्स लाए हैं 1808 शेड्स एक ही प्राइस पर। JSW पेंट्स, थिंक ब्यूटीफुल।
In 1868, the Tata Group was founded on a philosophy that put the community at the heart of its existence. Today, we are a $100 billion global enterprise. Our today has been built on enduring values. Our today is about delivering excellence across business sectors. Today is about building a future-ready nation. Our today has a strong foundation with community at its core. Our today is dedicated to the communities we serve. Today is always about more than just today. Our today is a continuous journey for a better tomorrow. Tata, leadership with trust.
सर, अपनों को खुश रखना इससे आसान हो ही नहीं सकता। साहब, अपनों को खुश रखना इससे आसान हो ही नहीं सकता। हुजूर, अपनों को खुश रखना इससे आसान हो ही नहीं सकता।
अपनों को खुश रखना इससे आसान।
अपनों को खुशियां दिलाना आसान नहीं बनाते तो आगे कैसे बढ़ते। इसीलिए हम जो भी करते हैं उसे बेहतर बनाते आ रहे हैं, बनाते रहेंगे। बजाज फिनसर्व, थिंक इट डन।
आने वाले कल की दस्तक हमें सुनाई देती है, नई मंजिल है जिस ओर हमें वो दिशा दिखाई देती है। नए इंडिया का नया जोश, नए इंडिया का नया जोश, नए जोश से निकल पड़े हम, आने वाला कल होगा हमारा। नए इंडिया का नया जोश।
और नए इंडिया के इस सफर में टेक्नोलॉजी की शक्ति लेकर आपका भागीदार रहेगा रिलायंस। रिलायंस, नए इंडिया का नया जोश।
Welcome to the world of Tata Steel, a flagship company of the global business conglomerate, the Tata Group. Tata Steel is one of the world's most geographically diversified steel producers, with operations and commercial presence across the world. The story began with the dream of one man, Jamsetji Nusserwanji Tata, a pioneer, a visionary, a man ahead of his times. He had his heart set on building a steel plant in India that would compare with the best globally. His dream was brought to fruition by his son, Dorabji Tata, and thus was born Tata Iron and Steel in Jamshedpur in 1907. At the turn of the 21st century, fueled by its global aspirations, Tata Steel expanded its footprint to Southeast Asia in Singapore and Thailand. Acquisition of Chorus in Europe in 2007 placed it amongst the top global steel companies in the world. In 2015, Tata Steel set up a state-of-the-art integrated steel plant at Kalinga, Nagar, Odisha in India. The Phase 2 expansion of Kalinga Nagar steel plant from 3 million TPA to 8 million TPA is currently underway. The company is all set to pursue domestic growth with its acquisition of Bhushan Steel Limited and the steel business of Usha Martin. This forms part of the overall strategy to increase its India footprint, build capacity in long products, and enrich the product portfolio. Besides steel manufacturing facilities, the company has mining assets in the state of Jharkhand and Odisha in India. Tata Steel has evolved into a leading steel manufacturer, catering to diverse market segments. In its trend-setting journey, spanning more than a century, Tata Steel has contributed immensely towards the well-being of the planet and people. Guided by its vision to be the global steel industry benchmark for value creation and corporate citizenship, Tata Steel is poised to lead the future.
सुरक्षा हर पिच पर, ताकत लंबी पारी खेलने की, परफेक्ट फिट, क्वालिटी टेस्ट, मैच से पहले ये सारे चेक्स बहुत जरूरी होते हैं, ठीक वैसे जैसे घर की छत चूज करते समय। तो बस ले आइए GSW कलर ऑन प्लस किचन, जो दे आपके घर को मजबूती और सुरक्षा। GSW कलर ऑन प्लस, सुंदर छत सालों साल।
JSW नियो स्टील TMT सरिया बेस्ट है।
सरिया दिखता कहाँ है?
ये देखिए बेस्ट क्वालिटी।
चेस्ट गार्ड है, दिखता कहाँ है?
दिखता नहीं तो कुछ भी लगाओगे क्या? ये देना।
JSW नियो स्टील TMT बार, प्योर स्टील, मजबूत घर।
ये दीवारें जानती हैं हर शुरुआत का पता। एक नई सोच के साथ अपने सपने की सुबह।
जब उम्मीद मिलाए हिम्मत से हाथ, हर सपने को मिले मजबूती का साथ।
आओ बनाए हर सपने को मजबूत JSW सीमेंट के साथ। JSW सीमेंट, द लीडर्स चॉइस।
कभी हिंदुस्तान के रंगों के बारे में सोचा है? लाल, पीला, हरा, नीला। तो चलो मिलकर इस रंगीन चादर को फिर से सिलते हैं। जो तेरा वो मेरा, और जो मेरा वो सबका। इसीलिए पहली बार JSW पेंट्स लाए हैं 1808 शेड्स एक ही प्राइस पर। JSW पेंट्स, थिंक ब्यूटीफुल।
In 1868, the Tata Group was founded on a philosophy that put the community at the heart of its existence. Today, we are $100 billion global enterprise. Our today has been built on enduring values. Our today is about delivering excellence across business sectors. Our today is about building a future-ready nation. Our today has a strong foundation with community at its core. Our today is dedicated to the communities we serve. Our today is always about more than just today. Our today is a continuous journey for a better tomorrow. Tata. Leadership with trust.
सर, अपनों को खुश रखना इससे आसान हो ही नहीं सकता। साहब, अपनों को खुश रखना इससे आसान हो ही नहीं सकता। हुजूर, अपनों को खुश रखना इससे आसान हो ही नहीं सकता।
अपनों को खुश रखना इससे आसान।
अपनों को खुशियां दिलाना आसान नहीं बनाते तो आगे कैसे बढ़ते। इसीलिए हम जो भी करते हैं उसे बेहतर बनाते आ रहे हैं, बनाते रहेंगे। बजाज फिनसर्व, थिंक इट डन।
आने वाले कल की दस्तक हमें सुनाई देती है, नई मंजिल है जिस ओर हमें वो दिशा दिखाई देती है। नए इंडिया का नया जोश, नए इंडिया का नया जोश, नए जोश से निकल पड़े हम, आने वाला कल होगा हमारा। नए इंडिया का नया जोश।
और नए इंडिया के इस सफर में टेक्नोलॉजी की शक्ति लेकर आपका भागीदार रहेगा रिलायंस। रिलायंस, नए इंडिया का नया जोश।
Welcome to the world of Tata Steel, a flagship company of the global business conglomerate, the Tata Group. Tata Steel is one of the world's most geographically diversified steel producers, with operations and commercial presence across the world. The story began with the dream of one man, Jamsetji Nusserwanji Tata, a pioneer, a visionary, a man ahead of his times. He had his heart set on building a steel plant in India that would compare with the best globally. His dream was brought to fruition by his son, Dorabji Tata, and thus was born Tata Iron and Steel in Jamshedpur in 1907. At the turn of the 21st century, fueled by its global aspirations, Tata Steel expanded its footprint to Southeast Asia in Singapore and Thailand. Acquisition of Chorus in Europe in 2007 placed it amongst the top global steel companies in the world. In 2015, Tata Steel set up a state-of-the-art integrated steel plant at Kalinga, Nagar, Odisha in India. The Phase 2 expansion of Kalinga Nagar steel plant from 3 million TPA to 8 million TPA is currently underway. The company is all set to pursue domestic growth with its acquisition of Bhushan Steel Limited and the steel business of Usha Martin. This forms part of the overall strategy to increase its India footprint, build capacity in long products, and enrich the product portfolio. Besides steel manufacturing facilities, the company is mining assets in the state of Jharkhand and Odisha in India. Tata Steel has evolved into a leading steel manufacturer, catering to diverse market segments. In its trend-setting journey, spanning more than a century, Tata Steel has contributed immensely towards the well-being of the planet and people. Guided by its vision to be the global steel industry benchmark for value creation and corporate citizenship, Tata Steel is poised to lead the future.
Should we start?
Yes, sir, we can start now.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. And on behalf of all my panel members, I'm delighted to welcome you to one of the most exciting sessions, which is on India's economic resurgence. We have come to a crucial point of time in 2020, where we shall very soon say hindsight is 2020. And in that context, it's time for us to look ahead, both with binoculars and a compass at the same time. And in that context, let me first quickly introduce my fellow panel members. Shri Arun Goyal, Secretary, Department of Heavy Industries, is a seasoned policy maker with rich experience driving policy in many areas of manufacturing, finance, and urban development. Today, we will have the opportunity to listen to his thoughts on manufacturing resurgence through technology and industry 4.0. I'm also delighted and honored that we have one of the people I have had great regard for, and I consider in many ways my mentor, Mr. K.V. Kamath, former chairman of New Development Bank and a legend of the financial world. Mr. Peter Verghese, who has been the High Commissioner of Australia to India, has brought out a detailed and seminal report on making India the next economic partner for Australia. Mr. Kim Forsing is the CEO of Danfoss, who has invested significantly in India over the last 6 years and is also undertaking exports from India. And Mr. Paul Herman, the chairman of the board of directors of Capgemini, a global leader in consulting, digital transformation, technology and engineering services, and is one of the largest investors in Indian talent, has a very large force working out of India, and is also playing an active role in strengthening the Indian-French relationships. Dr. Rakesh Mohan, who I consider as a French philosopher and guide, and I've known him for many years. He's played an active role in policy making, both in Delhi, in the government of India, as also as the Deputy Governor, formerly of Reserve Bank of India. He is a phenomenal economic thinker and was part of the industrial policy document and deregulation which India saw from 1991 onwards. He brings a unique depth and understanding of both industry, infrastructure, and finance, and what makes and works for the Indian economy. So colleagues, friends, we have truly an outstanding panel. And before I request each of the panel members to share their thoughts with you, I just wanted to give my little bit of a perspective. India is at a crucial point where it needs both structural as well as tactical reform at this juncture. India has made significant progress on the reform side, whether it is labor markets, whether it's bold initiatives in the field of infrastructure, in the field of agriculture, as also in the digital field. There are 5 areas where I think India needs to have greater focus in the times to come, amongst others, which is infrastructure, healthcare, sustainability, education, and even defense. So in this background, these are the structural areas where India needs to focus on for a significant structural recovery and resurgence of India. From a tactical point of view, I think many investors in India and around the world are looking at stronger respect for contracts, especially by state governments, and also things like payment mechanisms from government institutions versus vis-a-vis the investors, both in the private and international sectors. I think time has come for us to, at this point of time, for our resurgence to make it sustainable, to also think about 2 areas where we need big focus. Number 1 is private investments. Private investment in India over the last few years has been slow. What does it take to turbocharge private investments? And the second aspect, particularly in the post-COVID world. What about jobs? How is India going to create jobs for millions of Indians who are entering the job market as a very young population in the years to come? In that context, these two factors will also have an important play on India's trend growth rate. There have been some economists who have been predicting lower trend growth rate for India in the years to come. I mean, many of us have believed that India has the ability of sustainable trend growth rate of 7 to 8%. But in the post-COVID world, with all the challenges, how do we ensure that we do not get stuck at lower rates of growth and actually are able to sustain high growth rates, which is crucial from an Indian point of view, not only in terms of absolute GDP, but even more in terms of per capita GDP, where India has some ways to go. So in this background, I would also like to say that the government has made many changes, some of which I discussed in the area of labor, agriculture. The government has also embraced privatization in non-strategic sectors and has been bold and frank and open about it, including moving away from the pre-bottlenecks, which was governments in India used to be calling it disinvestment rather than privatization. We are getting bolder. A lot of change is happening. Prime Minister Modi, in some of his dialogues, has also mentioned that he embraces market reforms as the way for India to go forward. So things are changing. We are at a crucial juncture in the post-COVID era. India has made rapid strides in many areas, including embracing technology and digital, but there is a lot of work to do in a few areas. So in order to make this now a starting point of our discussion, may I first request Shri Arun Goyal to make his presentation on resurgence in manufacturing. Mr. Goyal, please.
Mr. Uday Kotak, distinguished panelists, ladies and gentlemen, a very good morning to you all. First of all, I thank CII for giving me an opportunity to be with you this morning. As you all know, India has set for itself a target of $5 trillion economy by 2025, of which the target for manufacturing is 1 trillion. Currently, the size of manufacturing is approximately 400 billion. So this requires an annual growth rate of about 20%, which is a huge challenge. But when we are aspiring, so we are aspiring 20% of our GDP to be coming from manufacturing. As of today, India is approximately at 14% of GDP from manufacturing. But if we compare ourselves with the economies of China, it has 28% GDP coming from manufacturing. Germany about 20%, Japan about 20%. So looking at the size of Indian economy and the population, which Mr. Uday Kotak just talked about, the job, India has no escape from it. So if we have to create employment, the higher multiplier effect being in manufacturing, we have to target the growth of manufacturing and taking it to 20% of our GDP. If we look at past, manufacturing has grown in India. Value additions have gone up. One of the success stories in manufacturing has been the auto industry. In auto, as on today, approximately 90% is indigenized product. This size of pie of auto has grown manifold, as all of us know. To take this further, so as Mr. Uday Kotak was talking about structural and tactical reforms, on the tactical side, you must have read, government has come out with a huge outlay for production-linked incentives in the manufacturing sector. Big factor of which is auto. So the size is going to be approximately 1.5 lakh crores. We are now in close coordination with the stakeholders to work out the details. and hopefully it will be seeing light of the day in the final shape very soon. In the auto sector, e-mobility has been a prime target for Government of India. We came out with FAME 1, followed by FAME 2, which is underway. So we are targeting not only for the green technology, but also encashing the future growth, because not that the IC vehicles are going to go away, but the share is going to be taken away by the e-mobility. And that's where we can target and are trying to have the quantum jump of the largest share of the market. We have achieved a lot, no doubt, but we need to achieve much more and faster. So we can't be hoping at incremental changes. Our target is transformative changes. We have to focus on the areas with higher multiplier effects. It's the manufacturing, and within manufacturing, if we look at, it is going to be the focus on engineering R&D. When I said 90% of auto has come up, is now indigenized, but still the engineering R&D in auto is not happening to that extent as is desirable. Because if we have to take our share to the higher percentage, we need higher value addition. And higher value addition is going to come from high tech. If we look at the success stories in manufacturing of high tech around the world, so whether it is US, UK, France, Germany, Korea, or Japan, we'll see most of the hubs are in a radius of 200 to 300 miles. And historically, the sequence has been, in these pockets, the first growth was from the auto industry, which went into the capital goods, then into the defense production, and then into the aerospace. So this is where, because when we're talking of the high tech, we need a critical mass, and we also need synchronization of various resources. So in crude terms, engine is an engine, whether it is an auto engine or an aeroplane engine. But this is the higher engineering R&D, high-end engineering R&D. We started with it when we set up in 70s, 60s and 70s, the institutions like IITs and so on. But somehow we have not achieved it to the desired extent. We have the basic ingredients. Our manpower is one of the best. The engineering R&D which is happening across the world, outside India, Indians have a big role to play. So those engineers were trained in India, but may have been further trained outside. In India, a number of MNCs have set up R&D centers, which are employing thousands of high-end Indian engineers. But all those patents are going out. The higher multiplier effect of the engineering R&D, India is not encashing today. So that's where we need a big change. It's not easy, but it's possible. We have the resources. The most crucial resource for this being the manpower. So this is our biggest strength, which we need to encash. Now, when I'm saying that we are saying 20% rate of growth, seems daunting. But with the Industry 4.0, where now the IT is playing a major role in manufacturing, and in IT, India has an edge. So we may be late starter, but that in some sense gives us an opportunity to leapfrog. Another point, the COVID, as all of you know, it has reset the system. The IoT is now growing much faster than before because of COVID. COVID has reset the geopolitics. So it has opened opportunities for us. So we need to take this opportunity by changing our tactics, as I was saying, Mr. Kotek talked about. But for that, government alone cannot do. But government will be a strong catalyst. We need to bring our resources together and synchronize them. So from that angle, the resource in terms of engineering R&D, which I was talking about, we have the academia, the youth, the engineers, the entrepreneurs. With the 5G coming and already the prevalence of 4G, geographical and organization barriers have now started fading away. The resources across organizations and across geographies can now be pooled unlike before. So that gives us an opportunity. With this end in view, we in the government have started 6 web-based open manufacturing technology platforms. So these are the platforms for technology innovation. So the 6 platforms have been launched by IIT Madras, HMT, BHEL, CMTI in Bangalore, ARI Pune, and ICAT. So the aim is to develop mother manufacturing technologies indigenously. So we are going to throw open challenges, grand challenges on these platforms, where it's win-win for everyone. The government is a catalyst, but this is a platform which is going to host problems and find solutions, both in technology and the organizational thereafter, how to take it further. Because if we have to develop technology, that requires huge resource, as we see from the past incidents across the world. That money cannot come from government. That money has to come from the users. In India, that has not happened to the extent which is desired. So we need to trigger that so that the resources are utilized efficiently and there's a win-win situation for everyone. So the pumping in of resources has to come from the market forces. The government is trying to do through a comprehensive approach. Now we are in the industry 4.0, besides these platforms, what you're saying that they will lead to and we have to provide for the advanced centers of excellence for technology development, national testing and certification centers, skill development centers, particularly for skills level 6 and above. That's what we're talking, the high end. National Center for Industry 4.0. We have already set up, as most of you might be knowing, smart advanced manufacturing and rapid transformation hubs, what we call SAMARAT, as an Industry 4.0 initiative, which CII is partnering with us in a big way. So we are looking forward to these platforms becoming the people's platform in a genuine way, where the resources are pooled in and more resources are pumped in for the research, particularly for the engineering R&D, which gives us a higher rate of growth in manufacturing and consequently the whole economy. So I hope that all of us shall pool in to the best of
Thank you. Hello? Hello? Thank you. Mr. Goyal, are you done?
Yeah, I'm done. Thank you. Was I audible when I was speaking?
Yeah, the last 10 seconds got lost. Last 10 seconds.
Okay. It's fine. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Goyal. With that, I will now request Mr. KV Kamat. Mr. Kamat brings not only a Indian perspective, but a global perspective, particularly with his recent time he has spent in Asia and China. So, Mr. Kamat, how does India get its economic resurgence, which it deserves and rightfully should achieve? Mr. Kamat, you're on mute. Yeah.
And there was a wonderful background given by Mr. Goyal. I think prepares the pitch, as it were, for what we are talking. I will maybe make a few points which we will explore as we discuss. And since the theme is resurgence, I want to put it in context. I want to put it as reset, revive, and research. Reset and revive have happened, so I will run through them in maybe a minute or so. The reset, as we all know, happened in March, and it happened in a blink of an eye. We thought that reset of the mind is going to take a very long time, but it didn't. We were able to very quickly reset our minds as individuals, and we also reset the corporate mind. At the individual level, we learned to do things which we did not think we could do, and the corporate level, I think they rose to a completely different operating, I would say, level. So supply chains were restored, technology was leveraged as appropriate. The white collar front, you had the work from home and other initiatives taken, still in effect by and large across the country. Factory efficiency improved dramatically, because if you talk to most people who are running manufacturing enterprises, they're saying they're still making do with 75 to 80% of their staff, but running at near 100% efficiency. So in short, as I see, a new growth paradigm has set in consequent to the reset of the mind that has taken place. And I believe that this was visible in the Q2 operating numbers. We'll talk about that maybe a little later. And I'm sure it will be seen in the quarters beyond as we progress. In all this, I think we had this message of Atmanirbharata. I believe that Atmanirbharata has happened at the individual level and at the corporate level. We may use different phraseology, but clearly we have become more self-reliant in what we can do and in terms of what we can deliver in a very large context. Very quickly, to talk of, if we talk of resurgence, we also need to know what are the what is the backdrop in which we are operating. So if you look at our own backdrop, we have indeed a very healthy agriculture sector, a manufacturing sector which has come back to speed, which none of us really expected, at least I did. A strong financial sector, which again, a lot of people had doubts, rightly so, I think, given what we saw happening during the months of April and May, that we would have a broken financial system, not only domestically, but that was the fear even globally, that you would have problems in terms of building or rebuilding the financial system. But that has not happened. We have a strong financial sector. Well-established services sector. Our services sector was already well established. And I think the last 6 months or 7 months have taught us to have a strong overlay of what I call digital into the services sector. So we are getting, in a way, ready for the digital super cycle. And this is facilitated by the fact that we are digitally connected, and connections are increasing at a never before pace. Point number one. Point number two is that it is not only that we are connected, but we also have affordability in the context of connection. Connection which the layman can use within whatever means he or she has. This is the domestic backdrop. Equally, on the global front, we have a very benign global backdrop, with interest rates low, liquidity high, and for us, from an Indian angle, a BOP surplus. I think that BOP surplus is good. People may have a view on that, but from my point of view, that is actually an articulation of the faith that you probably are starting to learn to stand on your own feet. I look at it that way. There may be a different point of view. Secondly, if you look at the impact of the interest rate cycle, we have a situation where the entire T-bill curve is below the reverse repo rate. And so all rates are below policy rates. And domestically also a very liquid marketplace, which I think augurs well for the resurgence that we all hope will happen, and I believe will happen. And all this checks out. As this checked out, or is this something in the air when you look at what has happened in Q2? Q2 has been a pleasant surprise to almost every observer, and the forecast for the next few quarters have been very quickly revised upwards. And we will watch what will happen, including on various fronts such as moratoria, which will give us the equivalent of, I would say, high frequency feedback. So we need to watch what is happening on the moratoria front, though early indicators are, at least at the corporate end, the fears that we had, that there will be a mass challenge in terms of corporates seeking moratoria is not coming true. I think that augurs well for the research opportunity that we will have going forward. Now, are there challenges? Certainly there are challenges, but today I don't want to stress too much on them. I think I want to approach it with the mindset that we will work out the challenges. The key challenge, as I see, is reskilling, and some sectors which will continue to be hurt and will require handholding over the near term or even in the medium term. But there again, I think which of these sectors is getting rewritten virtually every month. 4 months back, when we looked at what could be requiring a moratoria and handholding, we had included, let us say, that the sectors impacted included hotels, construction, and so on. But out of this, whatever feedback that I am now hearing, the real estate sector seems to be coming out, particularly on the residential front in several parts of the country. So things are, I would say, moving very quickly. Now, finally, let me move to the resurgence opportunity. I start with a very simple thought in my mind that large part of India is yet to be built. If we aspire for a 5 trillion economy, there is a significant amount of building that has to be done, whether it is in any area of infrastructure. You start at urban resurgence, you talk of rural resurgence, you talk of roads, you talk of ports, you talk of rail. Any type of infrastructure activity that you're looking at needs to be built for the new India. And I'm sure the government has then, once you're looking at 5 trillion, already started aspiring higher. And you look at that, you then need, I would believe you have a 25-year opportunity to build India. So there is no there's no shortage of growth drivers, point number one. Second, manufacturing modernization, which Mr. Goyal talked about. The entire agriculture research part of it, housing for all, and I can go on and on. There are areas where hard infrastructure is required to bring us up to the ambitions that we have. And of course, along with that, we now have an opportunity to build this all in a green, clean manner, which I think no other country of our size, with all the, I say, positives meaning we're not experimenting anymore with untried technologies. We can build a cleaner India, the greener India with tried technologies at significantly lower cost than 5 years back. Add to this, I think the entirely, what I would call the entirely new area of operation that is, or growth that is opening up, and what I call the digital super cycle, along with the startup mindset that our people have, which I believe will drive a large part of the growth. And this cycle, I read a very interesting phrase somewhere. This cycle is democratic, it is demographic, it is digital, it is disruptive, dematerialized, and demonetized. Democratic, demographic, digital, disruptive, dematerialized, and demonetized. Democratic as in take your connectivity and which has become ubiquitous at a cost which is affordable, which makes everybody equal. Similarly, dematerialized. Just think of the device in your pocket today, which does the job of 10 devices, for some of which needed a whole room, if not a whole building, just 2 decades back. So it's dematerialized and demonetized. Just think of Airbnb or Uber or an Amazon. And there are even newer, I would say, examples like this company in China called Pinduoduo. Pinduoduo is a platform which is connecting rural producers to the urban home or your table, as it were. And in doing this, if the sign of success is market cap, this company in 5 years has a market cap of something like 180 or 190 billion US dollars. No assets. It is not owning any warehouses. It is not stocking. Basically connecting the market, the producer to the market, as it were. Look at it. Is it not possible in India? Absolutely possible in India, given where, in the last 6 months, the way we have reset our mind and where we are going. So add to this the PLI, which again Arun mentioned. I just read yesterday an interesting piece by an analyst who I actually respect. He said by 2027, this should add another 1.7% to growth. Now, we will see what it will add, but I think the steps have been taken, and clearly, in addition to the digital super cycle, then you have the PLI benefit to normal base case of growth. So our growth is going to be, if somebody says that we should have aspirational growth of 10%, it has a lot of building blocks, some of which are base case 6 or 7%. Then you have got these new drivers that come in. I, for one, would believe that this is possible. The last point I want to make is in all this, there's always a question, where is the money? This question has been asked for a long time. Now, I've been in this business for now 50 years. Throughout the 50 years, I've heard this question. So this, to me, this is nothing new. The most recent I heard it was in 2004 or so, when 5% or so was our growth. Our savings rate was 24%, and an eminent economist said, "But how will we grow with this savings rate?" Indeed, in the next 5 years, we grew at near 9 to 10%. So, it is possible to grow at pace which are aspirational, at a pace which is aspirational, and we can make things happen. I start with that mindset that we can make things happen, and the pandemic has taught us the ability to leapfrog. Again, mentioned by Mr. Goyal, we are able to now leapfrog. To conclude, the need, I think, is to set aspirational goals, to fully leverage the decade which has been gained. I call it the decade gained because of the pandemic, and consolidate our growth base, add these new elements, and imagine the impossible and then build. Thank you, Uday.
Thank you, Mr. Kamath. I love the phrase decade gained, and I also liked your R&D. So the points on R's and points on D, very valuable. And in that context, also Arun Goyal's wonderful roadmap in manufacturing in the area of both structural and tactical. So with this perspective, I would now request Mr. Peter Verghese, who also is the Chancellor of University of Queensland, Australia. Give us the perspective of the world from where you see it.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Kotek, and thank you to CII for the opportunity to participate in such a distinguished panel. I wanted to offer some personal perspectives from an Australian point of view on India's economy. Let me make 3 headline points, and then I'll circle back and try and explain them. The first is that the Indian economy has some deep structural drivers, which is going to give it very significant momentum. And if that momentum can be combined with a program of considered structural economic reforms, India stands a very good prospect of finding that sweet spot, which will not only raise living standards for Indians, but also, very importantly, provide employment for a very young demographic. Secondly, that the geopolitical currents globally are opening up new windows for India. And if India gets its economy right, its capacity to be a significant geopolitical player will be significantly. My third point is that Australia's ambitions for the bilateral relationship are high. We see India as a first-tier economic and strategic partner, and also with growing people-to-people links, which will be, I think, into the future as close as any that Australia has in Asia. So let me go back to the trajectory of the Indian economy and make the obvious point that India does and always will, I think, march to its own economic tune. It is the only country with the scale to match China, but India will not be the next China, because I think the economic trajectory will be sui generis. The drivers of Indian growth and the construct of its economic model are, I think, driven by deeper structural forces, which to me suggest they're also quite sustainable, and they include the urbanization of the world's largest rural population, movement from the majority of Indians are employed to the formal economy, a young demographic, which can be a very significant asset for India if employment is there for. what is now a very considerable investment in infrastructure, which in the past for Indian economic growth, and the beginnings of a very ambitious plan to upskill Indians. Now, these drivers, I think, will likely keep India on a relatively strong economic growth path. And in the report I did, economic strategy for Australia and India, I took a relatively conservative view of India's long-term growth prospects, arguing that the 6% per year until 2035 was a realistic objective. That's based on an incremental approach to economic, a radical approach to reforms. And for what is already 6 to 8% per year is obviously going to be a hugely consequential development. But I think it's also the case that while these deeper drivers will give momentum to the relationship, it is essential that India continues with structural economic reforms if it's to move potential to delivery. Now, India doesn't need any tuition on what those reforms should be, and least of all from someone from outside of India. The reform debate in India over the last several decades in areas such as reforms of the banking system, access to land, labor market rigidities, deregulation, private, and how to do all of this in an argumentative and very robust democracy such as India is obviously a matter for India, but it will require very significant investment of political capital. Economic reform, as we all know, is never easy, and there will always be constituencies who are opposed to it. So how much political capital invest in economic reform versus other issues will be a question challenging India's political leadership, I think, for decades to come. Now, I think India has shown in the past that when it must, it can deliver on economic reforms. For decades, India's per capita income has quadrupled, and well over 200 million people have been lifted out of poverty. And the lessons of India's economic history is that the more it opens up its economy internally and externally, the stronger its economic performance. And I think that's the background against which India's well-wishers will view concepts such as self-reliance. Self-reliance is virtue, but the risk is that it can slide into self-sufficiency, which I think has a far less illustrious economic history. So economic sovereignty, I think, has made a comeback everywhere in the post-COVID era, but COVID hasn't changed the laws of economic gravity. It hasn't obliterated comparative advantage in trade or the economic benefits of the efficient allocation of domestic resources. And whether we're in Australia or India or in Europe, we should all keep this firmly in mind when we discuss concepts such as self-reliance or dual circulation or decoupling and so on. I think the post-COVID focus on the security of supply chains opens up significant new opportunities for India, because India is high on everybody's diversification strategy. And if India is to act on these opportunities, it will need to do everything it can to increase the attractiveness of India as a place to invest in manufacturing. And I know that that's a high priority not only of CII but also of the Indian government. Let me make one point about currents of geopolitics, because again, I think this is on the positive ledger for India. So China's abandonment of hide and bide, its ambition to become the predominant power in the Indo-Pacific, its use of economic coercion, its desire to recreate the Middle Kingdom, by which harmony is hierarchy and China is at the top of the hierarchy. All of this is leading other countries to look to balance and constrain China, and India is seen by many as an important element in those strategies. So the more India can do to this larger geostrategic role, which so many of its friends and partners wish it to play, because without economic heft, India's role will be more rhetorical geopolitically than real. So let me now just turn briefly to Australia and India, because both the economics and the geopolitics that I've described sit behind our ambition to lift India as both a trading and an investment partner. And at the heart of the strategy is a recognition that there is a structural complementarity between the demands of a group and Australia's capacity to provide goods and services, whether we're talking about education, resources, energy, food, healthcare, tourism, or cooperation in water and environment management. And indeed, I think services are going to be the fastest growing segment of the future Australia-India economic relationship. In my report, I identified 10 sectors where I think Australia has a measure of comparative advantage to work in the Indian market, and I also identified 10 Indian states where Australia should focus its attention. And that focus on states is a reflection of a number of judgments. First, that India is best seen not as a single economy, but as an aggregation of very different state economies, each growing at different rates, strengths, led in different ways, and likely to continue to be uneven in their progress. Second, that competitive federalism is becoming a much dynamic of the economy, something encouraged by and I think taken up with some enthusiasm by state governments, including those 6 Indian states which produce 75% of India's exports. And it's also the case that some of the toughest structural reforms India faces, such as land and labor, can only be resolved with the full cooperation of state governments. As barriers to trade across Indian states reduce, and the introduction of the GST, I think, was an enormous step in that direction, labor and capital will inevitably gravitate towards states which offer the best conditions for business. I want to make one observation about investment, and then I'll conclude. In Australia's relationships in Asia, investment has lagged behind trade by a very long way in virtually all of those relationships. India, I think, offers us an opportunity to bring into better balance our trading and investment relationship. India, in my view, has a relatively open foreign investment regime. Institutions are familiar to Australians. The rule of law is well established. English is spoken. These are all very significant business assets for potential investors into India. And so on the basis of that, I said in the report that we should be looking to increase by a factor of 10 Australian outward investment into India, bringing India into the top 3 nations for Australian foreign investment. So let me just conclude with a couple of very quick points. Like many countries, a big hit from COVID, and even before COVID, there were signs its economy was slowing. But now we are seeing the beginnings of a strong recovery, a resumption of activity, and a growth trajectory. I remain very much a long-term optimist about India, no matter what the short-term fluctuations may be. I think the trend line of an opening Indian will continue to carry the future of India's economic trajectory. That line was never linear in India's case, and it was always subject to the many compromises intrinsic to a great democracy. But it remains, in my view, the key to India moving from potential to delivery. So I'll end my comments there.
Thank you, Mr. Varghese. You have brought an interesting perspective on the geopolitical currents which work in India's favor. India being on the diversification agenda of almost every country, and India needing to have more economic heft to make its presence meaningful in the global scheme of things, and also your overall positive outlook on India-Australia economic relationship. May I now, we have got 3 more speakers before we have Q&A. May I request each of the speakers to try and speak for around 8 minutes so that we have at least some time for Q&A at the end. May I request Mr. Kim Forsing, CEO of Danfoss, to share his thoughts.
Absolutely, and thank you very much for this unique chance to speak in this distinguished panel here today. So first of all, at Danfoss, we are in over the last few years in a high investment mode in India, building a very strong manufacturing and technology base, R&D setups right now, in a matter of fact, of 3 strong campuses spread over India. We are very focused in a few areas of building a sustainable infrastructure, energy efficient infrastructure, food production, the e-mobility, building up electrification capabilities, and so on. So really areas that is directed very much into the future. So we are really a global tech company, very focused now to build the capabilities in India. We see, and that's actually our message here today, we see a strong link between the research, the economy, building a 5 trillion future economy. There's a strong link between, I would say, the sustainable green investments into the building the infrastructure needed for this economy, but also building a strong manufacturing and R&D base in India. We see actually a strong opportunity together now with coming out of the global crisis and the COVID situation, of aligning the investments in this direction, because when we do recurve economies, then better on the pillars of the future. So we see here very strong opportunities in directing investments in the area of solving some of the climate topics, together with building a very strong future-oriented manufacturing and technology base in India. And actually, in a matter of fact, we have been very encouraged by the increased Indian Danish cooperation. So we are Danish-based, though that we are global today. So the Green Strategic Partnership that has been launched here in September, where Prime Minister Modi said at the summit with the Danish Prime Minister that India has the scale and Denmark has the skills. So we think there's a very strong alignment here between the journey building India in the future and combining it with basing very strong technologies in India. And therefore we are very focused on building up strong technology hubs in India, as not only a base for India, but also a global manufacturing hub and a global R&D hub for our businesses. So we see vast opportunities here linked in various areas. They are all deeply connected to the deep decarbonization agenda. I think it can be fast-tracked very much. The technologies are here, and I know India is very ambitious in various areas. We, of course, see the big areas here combined with an very energy efficient infrastructure. When we build infrastructure, and energy efficient and future oriented agricultural and food production sector. We know you are investing in solar and other renewable areas. That's very strongly linked, of course, to electrification going forward. And therefore, within these areas, we can see an enormous potential of when we are recurbing the economy globally, we build, of course, future technology that is based on some of the biggest trends that we are experiencing right now. And I have to say, in Danfoss, we have been exposed into building that and sustainability for many, many years. There's no doubt over the last few years, there is an enormous uptake across the board, and not the least in e-mobility, and also in areas that goes beyond e-mobility. So electrification of the marine sector, electrification of highway machines, which is big investment areas for Danfoss also in India. So we believe that altogether, building a future-oriented, strong, high-quality jobs and R&D facilities in India is really core to a long-term sustainable growth. And we believe in the company that access to the global talent base is next to none. Which is essentially our big limitation for the moment. How fast can we scale these technologies and develop the technologies of tomorrow? With that, I just want to conclude to say, in Denmark, we essentially created the sustainability step up through the 70s after the oil crisis out of pure need. And it became a fantastic transition where we could decouple economic growth and energy consumption. I think many of these opportunities are today also in India. And just to bring an example here, we also in the company taking our own medicine. So to say, we are having a target for the company to be CO2 neutral by 2030, and we are tracking to achieve that. And all these opportunities are there in India. It's challenges, but it takes a very clear cooperation, of course, between industry, academia, and the government. And we believe that that's probably one of the biggest opportunities that is laying out there for right now. First, curving ourselves out of the current challenges, but also creating a long-term, very sustainable and prospering economy and industry. So I think with that, I will keep it at that, and to try to help you on the time scale, and then leave room for some questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fossing, and really appreciate your comments. And you brought in the perspective, the very important perspective of sustainability as we go down the path of growth and resurgence for a future world. In many ways, I think our generation faces the challenge to ensure that we don't borrow from the future disproportionately, whether it's on the account of climate change or whether it's on account of money. On both those, finally, we have to be careful about how much we indebt the future with our current actions. So really appreciate that. Thank you very much. And may I request Mr. Paul Herman, Chairman of Capgemini, to share his thoughts, please.
Thank you, Mr. Kotak. I want to first thank CII, because this is quite an incredible gathering of talent over these 4 days. So quite impressive. I've been following this summit, and I was honored already to be asked to participate to another session. And CII is a long-term partner for me because you support the India-France Forum of Large Enterprise, and we are preparing with CII the next forum virtual meeting this time for January. As you said, I have a double perspective because as the chairman, I was the CEO of Capgemini for 18 years, so I really led the big Indian investment for the group. I know very well India. Capgemini is everywhere in India, from large cities like Bangalore to Trivandrum and even Trichy. So we cover, and in the north too, Gurgaon and Kolkata. So no southern bias. So we know everywhere. And that was an investment that was triggered by the formidable investment in education. I just say, I think this was a long-term strategy. And we are in India because of the quality of the skills and the quality of the IIT network. We know that, we tap into that reservoir, and that is quite unique in the world, can I just say. And what we learned in this year 2020, something that was not necessarily anticipated, is the agility, the flexibility, and the resilience of that workforce. Because it's quite spectacular. We could move to work from home at the rate of 97%. Should imagine that last February we were all a little bit anxious and wondering if the telco network would support that. It did, which was a quite spectacular achievement of the Indian network operators. And we are even now growing in the second half of the year 2020. We are growing. Just our performance is probably comparable. I was talking recently with a former colleague from Capgemini, Mr. Salil Parekh, who is now the CEO of Infosys, but had worked with us for 17 years. So the IT service company that plays a big role in terms of employment of the skilled workforce and the contribution to the balance of payments of India has resisted pretty well to the downturn. It's quite impressive, be it Infosys that I mentioned, TCS, or the others. So first remark is the resurgence of India will be again based on the quality of people. We Capgemini are a people business, but this is a gigantic asset of India, betting on people. And I would add there, we are moving in a world where data will be the blood of the economy, and data will transform most industries, from Danfoss to anything. And that's what we call intelligent industry. So there will be a combination of data skills and engineering skills. And there I would suggest India to invest even more in education, but on engineering levels. IT, you're probably number one in the world. Engineering, there are some rivals, notably in some Eastern European republic that kept their engineering education system from the former Soviet traditions. So we see as competitors to India some company, I will not mention the name, but in Belarus, in Ukraine, that are displaying extreme talent of educating engineers. And I'm pretty sure India can do that again. And then I will come to my other hat, because at this time where we are at an all-time high in the India-French relationship, where your Prime Minister is very close, I think, to the French President Macron. Every meeting is an opportunity to celebrate the friendship and the strategic alignment of the two countries. I have an official mission that you mentioned in the introduction of supporting the French-India economical relationship. So with that task, I bring to India a delegation of small companies, and I tried to take them beyond Delhi to the capital states of several Indian states. So I have led delegation in Chennai, in Gujarat, in Rajasthan, in Bihar, everywhere. And here it's something, I think here I speak of companies that are interested in the Indian market, which is one of the fast growing markets in the world, and are interested also by your decision to take a position in the global supply chain. What I hear, notably recently from Indian officials, is given the tension between China and the US, can India be an alternative when needed to the Chinese supremacy in the global supply chain? And that's possible. And I would say we can move from the make in India to export from India. That will require a few adjustments, and we may discuss these adjustments in the next meeting of the France-India Forum next January. It's possible, definitely possible. I think we have made good progress in the Make in India strategy. We can do more in export from India. So there is a great future. So what could I say about the year 2020? I think people have been impressed because we were all a little bit fearful with the COVID disruption in the spring of 2020 about what will happen in India. All journalists in the world were looking at India. I think what we have seen is quite impressive. The resilience of the country, the fact that you kept your agenda of reform and of opening up further, this has called the attention, and I guess as of 2021, we can accelerate the journey. So I think it's an opportunity, and I think when you speak of resurgence, that's exactly the agenda I have in mind. Can I add, it might look a little selfish, that the French people wonder and aspire to become the gate to Europe, since London has now moved away thousands of miles away from EU, and respecting Copenhagen, of course, but I would just say we try to attract a few more Indian investors in France, thinking that Paris could be a good gate into the EU unified market. With that, I'm very optimistic about the French-Indian relationship. I'm quite active, and Capgemini will actively grow further in India. And I bet there is a bright future for engineering in India. And we recently bought a company that is specialized in engineering and R&D. And there is already a 15,000 platform in India. So our skill base in India moved from IT to all of engineering. That explains a little bit my attention to the investment of your education system in engineering. And I'm optimistic too about the constant effort to open the market. But I repeat, there were several comparisons about China. Where India is unique is with its youth. It will represent a gigantic share of the active population in 20, 30 years from now. That's certain. It's now a given that India will be the platform of young energy in the decades to come. The remaining challenge, and I would end with that, is sustainability. People realize the challenge more and more. I would just say 5 years ago, there was a little attention to sustainability in India. There are progress there. We have done a lot. We lead a lot of program on that based from India. And I think we can get further. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paul. Development of people and skills for a man who has 140,000 employees working in India across different parts of India. It's a very important input. And also the point that competition is coming from places, including like Belarus, from Ukraine, your confidence in the Indo-French relationship growing. And I must say with conviction that there is only one Paris in the world.
Thank you.
With that, I will now request my friend and deep thinker, Dr. Rakesh Mohan, for him since he has the last word. Over to Rakesh.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Uday, for inviting me, giving me the privilege of speaking to CII after many years abroad. So it's really actually to have this opportunity, and I thank you very much for giving this. And also in my new avatar as the president of the Center for Social and Economic Progress, which is of course the successor institution to Brookings India. I had to put that in as an advertisement for the new center. I'm perhaps going to give a somewhat different take because I perhaps a longer term view of Indian economic resurgence and a policy perspective in a sense. One thing that is very clear is that the time is clearly ripe now for India to aspire to further elevation in its growth trajectory to the next level. But what we must keep in mind is that even a sustained annual growth rate of 8% or thereabouts, say for the next 20 years, will mean about 7% annual GDP per capita growth. That means doubling every 10 years. And even if we do that, per capita income in 20 years from now will be about what China's is now. So there's absolutely no time to lose to reboot ourselves to aspire to that. It will also enable us then to become among the 3 largest economies in the world by 2035. And also on a more social welfare sense, that it's only if we do this kind of growth that we can expect to eliminate poverty in India within my lifetime, and it'll certainly be eliminated in your lifetime. Of course, the COVID crisis has set us back along with the rest of the world. Hence, there's absolutely no time to lose. Now, the record since independence, Indian record since independence, as others have also in some sense hinted in this session, is that we are indeed capable of sustained growth over a long period, even if it is punctuated by some periods of lower growth because of business cycles and other reasons. Also, our institutional system, which often looks chaotic, has also demonstrated that significant policy changes can be made in response to changing and challenging circumstances. We have demonstrated that at different times, as perhaps we are doing in the current challenges. So we have to be optimistic, but we do need to have some policy resets so that we can indeed again achieve economic resurgence. And one thing I must say is that we need to again reset our economic policy over the next for the next couple of decades, with really elevating growth as the objective of policy above everything else, because that really enables everything else. Now we must understand and recognize and admit that growth has indeed slowed down for the last 8 years or so, since around 2011, 12 or thereabouts. We must also recall that, of course, the economic reforms initiated in 1991 did let loose a new dynamic in the Indian economy, and it really did fire the animal spirits of the private sector, which all of you, of course, represent. And we did experience a growth spurt for almost 20 years. But the growth process seems to have started sputtering in the last 8 years or so. A significant feature of the acceleration experience in the 2000s was really an unprecedented level of savings that Mr. Kamath referred to, and acceleration of investment accordingly, which powered our growth in that period. That has both savings and investment, particularly private investment, have indeed slowed down in the last 8 years or so. Also, as has manufacturing, as have manufactured exports. Merchandise exports had peaked at around 17% of GDP by 2013-14 and have now fallen to just over 11%. Our merchandise export growth rate was actually higher than that of China in the previous 10 years. So it is something, as I mentioned, something we can do once we put our minds to it. Another thing we must recognize is that there's been a marked reduction in both capital goods production in the country and capital goods exports in the last 8 years or so. And that's concerning in the sense that it's really industrial investment, it's investment to growth that provides economic growth in the future. And the consistent imbalance of merchandise trade does reflect a lack of competitiveness of the Indian industry. And many people have talked about R&D. So I think that's a very key feature of what industry has to do, both the public sector and the private sector, to regain competitiveness is much greater emphasis on R&D than has been done in the past. Now, of course, this economic slowdown had become apparent even before the COVID-19 crisis, which has global crisis, which has hit India hard. The next fiscal year, in some sense, will be occupied by recovery from this crisis, not just here, but the rest of the world. So, in a sense, this gives us time for the government and the private sector to set our respective houses in order, to set the stage for real growth resurgence after we've recovered over the next fiscal year. Now, first, the direction of policy reforms in 1991 need to be reinforced going into the future. Rapid economic growth cannot be achieved without the traditional levers of high savings and investment. And that really, Mr. Kamath talked about the financial sector, and in some sense, we need to reboot the financial sector to give a kick up to financial savings, which have indeed been faltering in the last number of years, so that investment can take place. Similarly, infrastructure investment, which, as you know, have been associated in the past, needs a much greater revival in the future. And I have to say that it does possibly need some kind of reversal of policy towards greater public investment. As you would recall, I was among the people who did the India Infrastructure Report 95-96, which really promoted private investment in infrastructure, which I continue to believe in, of course. But I think we may have tried to go too far, which has indeed resulted in a number of problems. So the public investment does need to be revived in areas which are not as suitable for investment, but of course promoting investment, continuing to promote private investment in other areas. And of course, I won't talk about the financial sector because Mr. Kamath talked about it. And again, that has to be rebooted to enable the higher savings and investment. A key issue has, of course, been the inadequate generation of quality employment for the increasing Indian labor force throughout the Indian development process. And this has been particularly exacerbated over the last 15 years or so, when there seems to have been almost no net generation of quality jobs. Incentivizing labor augmenting investment in both agriculture and industry needs a new policy focus, along with more efficient public sector functioning overall, public government functioning overall, the provision of essential infrastructure, R&D, and other services, all designed to enable the private sector to revive its animal spirits for enhanced investment and growth. In particular, I have to say that Indian manufacturing has neither been employment intensive nor export oriented, unlike the development story of the Southeast Asian countries, including China. We must remind ourselves, and Mr. Kamath will be very aware of this, having lived both in his last few years and, of course, in earlier life in Asia, actually, that we have to be much more East Asia oriented, which includes Australia, because all the global growth in the next 20 years is going to come from Asia, not from the West, I'm afraid. That's partly demographic issues. So we do need to recognize a comparative advantage in labor-intensive industries, and this has not happened. Let me say that this lack of this lack of labor using manufacturing, production, and inadequate generation of non-agricultural jobs, and low productivity growth in agriculture itself is possibly related to inadequate health and education in the country. So one key point I want to make in terms of rebooting policy is that our key failure right through our development process has been in nutrition, health, and education, despite the bright spot IITs that have been mentioned. India remains far behind most middle-income countries, even some low middle-income countries, in terms of all the key human development indices. And right through post-independence period, we have not given adequate attention to nutrition, health, and education of the population. And this must receive the highest priority in both the government, public sector, and the private sectors alike. Just to make a case in point, that the recent news from the National Family Health Survey of 2019, just released last week by the government of India, gives a very disturbing picture. It is a matter of great concern, if I may say so, shame, that more than a third of Indian children suffer from malnutrition and poor health, leading to stunting, which is very not a nice thing to say. Thus, it is difficult to see the use of the demographic dividend unless we really attack this problem right now. and in the next 5 years. And this may actually, as I said, may be hampering the employability of new entrants to the labor force as new economic activities require an increasing level of educational experience, as everyone has talked about in terms of new technology, Industry 4.0, etc. And therefore, the new next generation of economic reforms, which people like me, people like us, neglected in the first generation of economic reforms, has to be a concentration on correcting the long neglected social needs related to nutrition, health services, primary and secondary schooling, along with a further quality upgrade of tertiary education. And this has been, and by the way, I must say this is a good time to make this correction because there has been a very significant increase in the quantity of health and education services in the last 20 years. Now we have to build on quality. The other orientation I would like to mention, Uday, is that we need a reorientation of policy which will need enhanced government expenditures at both central and state levels for investment in public goods and services and for the provision of what I've just talked about, nutrition, health, and education. The first condition, of course, is the enhancement of investment levels, both public and private. One issue that puzzles me greatly is in the last almost 20 years, actually, last 10 years certainly, there's been very little buoyancy in tax GDP ratios, despite a huge growth in incomes of all of us, all around the country, actually. The whole huge economic transformation in the country that has taken place, the tax GDP ratio has been rock solid in the last 10 years, last 12 years particularly. And so there has to be a much greater effort at actually tax compliance, both from taxpayers, but also from the government in terms of collecting taxes, not raising tax rates, but actually tax compliance across the country, because it just does not make sense that given the kind of growth that we've had, the tax GDP ratio has been the same. I'm saying this because we can't have better public services of all kinds, with the urban services, transportation, roads, infrastructure, health, education, etc., which the private sector needs to grow much faster. And so I think the key departure needs to be made is that a much greater emphasis of appropriate role of the state, or state, national, central, state, local, etc., to provide the kind of public services without which the private sector cannot survive. The main organizing principle of most reforms carried out since the early 1990s has been that of freeing the private sector from the myriad government controls that hobbled its performance for a long time, and that's exactly what we should be doing. This process still has some way to go, but that is a good thing to do. But what we did not do at the same time was to do a similar improvement in the performance of the government itself at all levels. And that's why I mean a rebooting of economic policy reforms is coming from me, right? Where I was among the foremost proponents of the policy reforms we did in the 1990s, which of course I subscribed to, but we, I think, did not do enough to strengthen the government. And let me make quite clear, I'm not talking about increasing public enterprises, okay? I'm talking about core public services the government must do. And therefore, my key message is that we have to strengthen the government at all levels to provide the public services of all kinds, infrastructure, health, roads, nutrition, education, transportation, governance of cities, burgeoning cities, towns, so that our private sector can once again perform the role in terms of animal spirits that is demonstrated so ably for about 25 years after 1991. Thank you very much for giving the opportunity for that.
Thank you, Rakesh, for a very candid perspective and a reality check of what are our current challenges and the areas we need to get better for a sustainable and sustained economic growth in the years to come. And with that, I think we have had a wonderful set of people speaking on this. And I'm going to start by first asking the question to Mr. Peter Verghese and Paul Herman, that if you look at India's political situation versus the economic opportunity, from a politics point of view, I understand, of course, that India on the east has a close relationship with Australia and Japan. But on a broad basis, from a political point of view, India's alignment has been more West, whether it's France or US or countries in the West. And if I look at the opportunity scale, that seems to be at a much higher growth rate east of India. Therefore, political alignment more West, with the exception of Australia and Japan, and economic opportunity significantly higher east from an external point of view. Therefore, I would really request Peter Verghese and Paul to share how India handles this challenge between politics and economics, since both of you have spoken on that subject, and go for a sustained growth and balancing its political requirements and objectives with turbocharging the economy.
Well, perhaps I could start, if I may. I don't think there is a necessary tension between pursuing the political, geopolitical outreach more westward and the economic opportunities that might lie more in East Asia, as Rakesh has said. I mean, Australia is an example of a country which has a broad Western geopolitical strategic orientation, is deeply enmeshed in East Asian economies. And I think what we're seeing more broadly in India's external relationships is a certain nimbleness in being able to navigate its interests without being straitjacketed into either past conceptions of policy or current structures. So I think there will be an omni-alignment characteristic to India's external relations, and I think a key part of that will be building further its links into East Asia. I mean, if you look at the Japan-India relationship, it is developing very, very strongly off both an economic and a geopolitical platform. I think if you look at India's increased interest in Southeast Asia, that's a very good example of looking and acting east. So I think India will be able to manage riding both of these horses reasonably elegantly.
Okay, thank you. Paul?
I'll start with a little funny remark. There are today former Indian blood and brain at the helm of Microsoft, IBM, Google. I wonder if I will ever see an Indian originated person at the helm of Alibaba or Huawei. So the fact is, culturally, we share, we welcome the Indian culture. So can I just say, where it's right that the Asian geographical zone will know a better economical growth than Europe, for instance, and possibly than the US, in terms of grabbing a market share of the global trade, my view is far more promising on the West than on the East. Try to export to China. I will try to monitor and follow your progress there.
Understand. Very interesting perspective. And it's important that we sort of get this balance right. I'm sure I can see Mr. Arun Goyal smiling and listening carefully. So before I come to Mr. Goyal for his views, I will now request Mr. Kamath, Rakesh, Dr. Rakesh Mohan, and Kim Forsing, that as we are on this threshold, there are many, many areas where India needs to get better. But if you were advising the government today in terms of priorities, and if I asked just 2 priorities which you would put at the top of the heap for India to take a call on this, whether it's structural, tactical, whichever way you would like to, what would those 2 priorities be for action by the government in 2021? I will request Mr. Kamath, and thereafter I will request Kim Fossing, and thereafter Dr. Rakesh Mohan. Mr. Kamath, please. Mr. Kamath, we can't hear you.
Thank you. Thank you. The first one would be leverage the new opportunity, what I call the digital super cycle. But that's going to add an element of growth which we did not have before. This gets funded primarily through equity, so you don't have the sort of challenges we have in seeking debt financing. 3, it can work in what I call a frictionless way. In fact, most of these businesses are run without friction. Having talked of friction as far as the conventional growth set is concerned, which still will be, I would think, 6 to 7% of our overall growth out of the 10% that I would say is aspirational. 6 to 7% would be the base growth. There, what I hear from industry leaders is we need a reduction in friction. So could we work on reducing friction? So 2 points: stress on the digital front, the digital super cycle, encourage and drive it. Second, for all other businesses, reduce friction.
Thank you, Mr. Kamath. May I request Mr. Fossing, please?
Yes, absolutely. And maybe if you allow me a couple of things. So I would first really like to see that target investment in fast tracking green transition, because I believe it's a very strong fundamental way to get a very high quality growth going forward, and then keeping to making it easy to establish ourselves in India. As said so many times, fantastic talent base, but if we can get better and better in India to make it easier and easier to get established, to have the flexibility needed, I think you will see a prosperous development.
Okay, so that's one.
There was two. Both curbing the decarbonization track. That was the one, and 2 is really to continue to open up India, making it easy to get established. That's number 2.
Okay, open up India. Okay, good. Rakesh Mohan.
In addition to what I said when I spoke, 2 points. Two very different points. One, to learn how to engage on the economic front with China, despite the political and geostrategic tensions which will continue. And in some sense, take a leaf out of Taiwan's book. In a way, our tensions with China are no comparison with their political tensions with China, yet it does not stop them from being fully involved with China on the economic front. I think that's number one, that we need to learn how to engage on the economic front with China. That's the biggest market in the world for the next 20 years. And from what Mr. Herman said, look, they have a higher import to GDP ratio than the United States does. And the GDP is just about getting to the United States level as well. So we have to find those opportunities. Second, really use 2021, 22 to sort out and clean up our financial sector. And for that, I would say they should make Mr. Kamath the czar of cleaning up. And so that by the end of fiscal 2022, we have a healthy financial sector which can actually fund everything. Of course, with all the new financial sector things, again, which he's most familiar with, in terms of fintech, etc. So that by the end of fiscal 21, 22, we have up so many of the difficulties the financial sector is going through, which could include perhaps a bad bank. But I would just say, make Mr. Kamath the czar of that and give him powers to just clean it up so that we can get ahead.
Thank you very much.
I would have said you should be the czar, but then you have enough things to do.
Thank you, Rakesh. And as I think about this, I think this is a fascinating panel, and it is really giving us a international and a domestic perspective all in one single capsule. We are coming close to the hour, and I will say that this is something a lot to think about. But before I close, I wanted Mr. Arun Goyal to give his perspective of how he saw the session, and if he was asked by the Prime Minister what is the message from this in terms of going forward? Mr. Goyal, for you for your final words, please. Mr. Goyal, you are on mute. Mr. Goyal, you are on.
Thank you, Uday. It was very heartening to have the perspective from the distinguished panel today. So as you said, 1 or 2 points. So when Honorable Prime Minister of India looks, he can't look at 1 or 2 points. We are a huge country. We have all sorts of issues. So it is always a comprehensive approach, which is going to get us where we want to go. So, but I think, as I said, the thing which needs, in my personal view, the highest focus, which we haven't till now, is focusing on engineering R&D. Why I say so? Because say, if we are looking at auto, which has been a great success in our country in the manufacturing, we are clubbed with whom and whom we would like to be clubbed with. So the path which we have followed till now, are we being clubbed with, without any offense, Turkey, Mexico, Vietnam? And are we interested in being clubbed with Germany, Japan, and Korea? So we have to make a choice. The real big change is required, and we need to do it quick. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Goyal, for a very insightful perspective in the context of engineering. I think I don't have to add any more to the summing up with this very rich discussion, and I'm sure this is going to go a long way in at least bringing up the debate, or in the Indian language, as we call it, as manthan, for India to be out there in the Committee of Nations with sustainable high economic growth over a long period of time. And I thank each of the panelists for their very open and candid discussion and views. And I thank all the people who have been attending this session. And I do hope that this is a good harbinger for India resurging post 2020. Thank you very much and have a wonderful day ahead. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.